Hi, boys and girls. We just finished chapter 9, and that was talking about fractions. Actually, both chapters 8 and 9 were about fractions. And now we're going to move into chapter 10, which is learning about decimals. And although we finished our fraction chapters, you're still going to use what you've learned about fractions in order to work with decimals, because fractions and decimals are very closely related. So our lesson is 10.1, Understanding Tenths. Our learning target is to write a fraction or a mixed number involving tenths as a decimal. And to begin, I want to go back and we're going to look at a place value chart that you used at the beginning of the year when we first started place value, and should be familiar to you because it's the same place value chart that you used in 3rd grade, 2nd grade, 1st grade, and I think also in kindergarten. I'm not sure, but at least 1st grade. So we have ones here. It's represented by this one little square. The tens is represented by the stick, the 10 stick as we call it, and the hundreds place is represented by a hundreds flat. And then I don't have a cutout of thousands, but that's okay. You can use your imagination. All right, so we are not going to use that place value chart. We're going to use part of it, actually. We're going to use, for today's lesson, the ones place. But now, instead of looking at the places to the left of it, we need to look at the places to the right of the ones place. And so let me show you. So here is the place value chart that we are going to be using when we talk about tenths and hundredths. So here's the ones, and that was a whole number. We're going to represent ones by this flat, the hundredths flat. That represents one whole piece. And next, you have your decimal point. That's the dot, decimal point. And then you have the tenths, which is part of a whole. It means 1/10 means one part out of this whole flat. And then the hundredths place, which we'll talk about tomorrow, is represented by one of the little squares. And by the way, whenever you see that decimal point, you would say and. All right. Let's go and look at some vocabulary words that you're going to be working on today. So the first one is a decimal point. And if you have a pencil and paper, that would be great for you to take notes because you're going to need to know these terms. Decimal point, it's a symbol used to separate the ones place and the tenths place in numbers and to separate the whole dollars and cents in money. So here we go. The 0.1, which is actually 1/10, that decimal point right in between the 0 and the 1, it separates the whole numbers and the parts of a whole. And you might be familiar with decimal points when you've seen how money is written. It separates the dollars from the cents. Right. The next vocabulary word for this lesson is tenths place. So that's like our place value chart that we just looked at. It's the first place to the right of the decimal point. Ones, tenths place. Right. So that we can see the other vocabulary words. I'm going to move this out of the way. Decimal. So when we talk about what a decimal is, not the decimal point, but what a decimal is, it's a number with one or more digits to the right of the decimal point. And so this is a decimal because there are places after the decimal point. This is a decimal, and that is a decimal. And our last vocabulary word for today is tenth. And tenth is one of 10 equal parts of a whole. So to represent 1/10, that would be one part out of 10. Right, we are done with that for now. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to look at these decimal squares, tenths, and we are going to practice representing a fraction We're going to represent it in a model, and also we're going to learn how to write the fraction as a decimal. So let's start off with, I'll put it here. Let's start off with the fraction 3/10. When we talked about fractions, we know that this would mean 3 out of 10. 3 out of 10 parts. So we're going to do the same thing when we shade the parts of this square. There's 10 parts altogether. There's our denominator, 10 parts altogether. And if we want to show 3/10, we would shade in 3 of these rectangles. So there you go. So 3/10 is equal to this model. Now to write it as a decimal would be, there are no whole numbers, 0, and then the decimal point, and then the number 3. And how would you say this? You would say 3/10. Tenths. 3/10. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and cover this one so that we can do our next example. Our next example will use this, and I'll cover this up. 7/10 is our fraction. So 7/10 means 7 parts out of 10. Let's shade 7 parts out of 10 for this square. Let's see if we can do this quickly. Let's see, I don't have to watch. Color this all in there. All right, a little sloppy, that's okay. So this model represents 7/10. That's the 7/10, 7/10. All right, so now let's write it as a decimal. There are no whole numbers, so that'd be 0. We need a decimal point, 7. And how would we say that? That would be 7/10. You gotta remember that THS at the end. 7/10. All right, so I'm just gonna put this here. That represents 7/10. This represented 3/10. We'll just do that to get it out of the way, because now I need to use both of these decimal squares to represent my next number. Actually, the next one is going to be a mixed number. It is 1 and 8/10. So I need both of these because I need to represent the whole number 1 plus the fraction 8/10. So for the whole number 1, well, I need to go ahead and shade in this whole square because that represents one whole. So I'm going to just kind of do this. Okay, just pretend that all of that is shaded. Okay. All right. Now we need to represent 8/10, or 8 parts out of 10. Well, I'm going to count 8 of these rectangles and shade all of that in. All right. So to write this as a decimal, I'm going to put it down here because I don't have very much room on my sticky note. 1 whole, and then we need to put the decimal point, and 8/10. And 2, oops, oh, sorry, there you go. 1 whole and 8/10. How would we say this? We would say 1, and then remember when we were looking at the place value chart with the decimals, we have to say 1 and 8/10. That decimal point, you say and. All right. Okay, boys and girls, let's go ahead and get into the types of problems that you will be seeing on your math work today. Get that out of the way. All right. Here we go. Let's go down to the bottom. We have the problems. Now, on your work today, you're not going to have any models to look at because I couldn't figure out a way to insert that in Google Forms, but that's okay. What you're going to mostly be doing is writing fractions as or mixed numbers as a decimal. So here's 5/10. Here's a model, 5 parts out of 10. To write that as a decimal is there's no whole numbers, decimal point 5, 0.5. Well, 5/10 is how you properly say that. All right, 1 7/10. Here's one whole. There's 7 parts out of 10. How you'd write that as a decimal would be 1 whole. Write your decimal point, and then 7. 1 7/10 is how you would say it. Right, next page. This next part, you're supposed to shade the model to represent the fraction or mixed number, then write the fraction or mixed number as a decimal. 2/10. Well, you just have to shade in 2 of the parts. 2 parts out of 10. Let's write this as a decimal. 0, decimal point 2. That's 2/10. Here, 1 9/10. Oh, we have a whole number 1, so this entire square is shaded. Now let's represent 9/10. That's all of this except for one part. Sorry, it's kind of messy. So everything is shaded except for the last one. And how do you write that as a decimal? 1 whole and 9/10. 1.9. Next, write the fraction or mixed number as a decimal. 7/10 is 0, decimal point 7. 4/10, 0, decimal point 4. 5 1/10, 5 1/10. That's 1 part out of 10. And number 8, 24 3/10, 24 3/10. All right, so moving on. Write the number as a fraction or mixed number and as a decimal. All right, so 6/10 is 6/10 is equal to, write it as a decimal, 0.6. Number 10, 11 5/10. 11 5/10. That's the mixed number, and that is equal to 11.5. Okay. Number 11, Newton passes 8 of 10 obedience classes. What portion of the classes does Newton pass? Write your answer as a decimal. He passed 8 out of 10. I'm just going to write the fraction first, which is the same as 0, decimal point 8 classes. We'll put it like that since it is a word problem. Classes. Number 12. You move a game piece around a game board 3 2/10 times before you lose a turn. Write this number as a decimal. 3 and 2. 3.2. And I guess I should write the word turns. Yeah. Okay. All right. I think we could do one more. This last problem. We need to look at this table at the very top of the page, dinosaur figurine collection. There are actually 10 different kinds of dinosaurs, and they've classified the 10 into either herbivores, carnivores, or omnivores. Let's take a look at the problem. Number 14, use the table above. What portion of the dinosaurs in your collection are herbivores? Write your answer as a decimal. So let's take a look. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 out of 10 dinosaurs are herbivores. Write your answer decimal. So it's 5/10, which is the same as 0.5 are herbivores. Do you know what herbivores are? Yeah, those are the plant-eating dinosaurs. Okay, so boys and girls, I've done more problems than I usually do, but that's okay. Hopefully, by doing that many, you were able to understand now how to write fractions as decimals, how to write mixed numbers as decimals. All right, boys and girls, good luck, and I will see you tomorrow.